Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, dear friends and colleagues from all over the world. We're very pleased to welcome you to this fourth session of this webinar series that we're running as part of the National University of Singapore Center for Innovation and Precision Eye Health. Today, it gives me great honor to welcome Professor Jose Pulido, who's woken up bright and early to speak to us on many exciting hot topics. And the title of his talk today is To Explore the Brave New World. Now, for those of you who don't already know who Professor Pulido is, he's a world-renowned ophthalmologist. Jose is he was at the Mayo Clinic for over 15 years, and he's an emeritus professor there. He now works at the Wills Eye Hospital and is the director of the Henry and Corinne Bauer Memorial Laboratories for Translational Medicine in the Vicky and Jack Farber Vision Research Center at Wills Eye. Jose has many achievements under his belt and has made significant contribution in the field of ophthalmology. As a first-year resident, he introduced the use of intraocular ganciclovir. He established the association of MIDI88 with vitreoretinal lymphoma, HLA-DR15 with multiple sclerosis and pars planitis, the CMAP factor with BDAM, amongst many other things. So Jose is one leading example of someone who never stops exploring, never stops asking why. And today he'll be covering several hot topics, including small activating RNAs, vibrational OCT, oncolytic viro-immunotherapy, and how they pertain to ophthalmology. I'll now hand over to Jose. Good morning, Jose, and thank you for joining us all the way from Philadelphia. Over to you, Jose.
Good morning. Thank you for the kind introduction, and I look forward to sharing this work with you. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So my financial disclosures, I have several patents through Mayo on iPSC-RPE cells, as well as several patents on viro-immunotherapy through Mayo. I received a check for a total of $2.86 from Mayo for these. So I'm not sure for which they pertain. They won't tell me. So last year I presented this talk on some of the early work I was doing, and I want to just expand on that early work. Since then, I've had some more work on viro-immunotherapy, more on saRNA, more on VOCT. If we have time, we'll hit some other things that I've been working on as well. So this was in a recent Science Translational Medicine, What's Next for Cancer Vaccines. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. There's hurdles to developing cancer vaccines. And this is important. This was in, I think, the December 21st, 2017, New England Journal of Medicine, where you can see on the x-axis the number of somatic mutations per megabase, and on the y-axis, the response to checkpoint inhibitors. And over here is cutaneous melanoma. Over here is cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma. Unfortunately, way over here is uveal melanomas. And the reason why cutaneous melanomas and cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas have a very good response to checkpoint inhibitors is that they're related to sun exposure, and so you're going to get a lot of mutations per megabase, and since they're so different, then you're going to get a response to checkpoint inhibitors. Unfortunately, uveal melanomas are way over here, where there aren't a lot of mutations per megabase, and therefore very poor response to checkpoint inhibitors. So that paradigm was used for Northern Europeans. For non-Europeans, because we don't have the genetics as well done, we can't use that same paradigm. But what you do is you check the normal tissue and you check the cancerous tissue, and then determine the mutations per megabase. So I was at Mayo, as Professor Chan said, for 15 years, and I started looking at viro-immunotherapy in 2005. Back then, all my colleagues were looking at diagnostic prognostication and for uveal melanomas, and it made no sense to look at diagnostic prognostication if you couldn't give them treatment. So I said, you know, there's plenty of smart people looking at diagnostic prognostication. I want to try to help these people. So in conjunction with Professor Richard Weil, we started looking at the use of viro-oncoimmunotherapy. And basically what that is to infect preferentially the tumor with a virus, and that virus then breaks the tumor down, releasing a bunch of antigens. And if you want, you can actually put in the virus antigens that might make the reaction even better, either in pro-inflammatory proteins that will be expressed, or new antigens. And then once that happens, you activate the immune system. And for instance, for uveal melanoma, that might increase the antigenic load. And as you can see, we're pretty successful in getting some good papers done. And again, this is basically what you do. You take a wild type virus, and with the wild type virus, you can get fatal disease, but you attenuate it, you turn it into an oncolytic virus, and you arm it. And it's non-replicative. You want to just treat certain tumors and then stop it from causing any further damage. And this is kind of like the Warburg effect. As you know, the Warburg effect, tumors have some differences from normal tissues. The Warburg effect exploits the fact that tumors don't do aerobic metabolism as well as normal cells, and so they use a lot more glucose for their anaerobic metabolism, and that's why PET scans work. Well, another Achilles heel for tumors is that they don't respond to interferons like normal cells do. They don't release interferons like normal cells do, and they don't respond to interferons. So we can exploit that difference. And one way you can exploit that then is to put the interferon genes within the virus. So we activate the tumoral cell, and we cause release of interferons. Interferons then bring in the T cells and cause an inflammatory reaction to the virus. And we've developed a range of viruses to try to exploit these differences. And we've had some good papers that have come out in Nature Medicine and Nature Biotechnology, as well as other journals. But I'm going to mainly talk about these. So if you take a mouse with prostate cancer and you give them a set of oncolytic viruses that express the prostate cancer library of antigens, you cure the prostate cancer. If you give the mouse with prostate cancer a virus that expresses a melanoma library of antigens, doesn't do anything. And as I said, this is the data from that. If, on the other hand, you take a mouse that has a melanoma and you give them the virus that expresses the prostate cancer library, doesn't do anything. If, on the other hand, you give a mouse with a melanoma the viruses that express the melanoma library, you cure the mouse for a while, the melanoma changes after a while, you then take out the new melanoma, make the new library, put it package again, and the mouse lives even longer. Now, the really cool thing is if you give a normal mouse the library that expresses the melanoma, the virus that has the library expresses the melanoma, you actually give the mouse VKH. You cause autoimmunity. So you've caused a paradigm shift. And nowadays with checkpoint inhibitors, this paradigm shift doesn't seem so weird, right? Where they take patients with a cancer, give them checkpoint inhibitors, and you cause autoimmunity. Well, we can treat autoimmunity. It's no longer weird to think about it that way. When we were first presenting this data and saying, okay, I've taken a refractory cancer that kills the mice or the human, and you then give them something that we can treat autoimmunity, that was revolutionary. And that's why it got into Nature Medicine and Nature Biotechnology. Now, this came out last year or 2 years ago in Clinical Cancer Research. And again, when we first started talking about this, it was, you can't do this, it's not right. And people are now saying, well, maybe it is right. So we purposely want to induce mutations in a cancer. And again, this was looked at with askance. You're going to make it worse. And we said, well, how can you make it worse if it's already bad and we don't have any treatments for it? And so we're putting in agents like ApoBec and interferon, and ApoBec induces mutations in the DNA. Well, I showed you before, the more mutations in the DNA, that the greater the chances are that checkpoint inhibitors are going to work. And this is interesting because ApoBec, which causes the mutations, is normally expressed in certain cancers. And guess what? It's the cancers that have the greatest response to the checkpoint inhibitors. So we published this, and we've shown that in mice, if you give these viruses that then cause expression of ApoBec plus chemo plus immune checkpoint inhibitors, you actually make a big difference in the mice. And we're looking at changing what we call now the epitopiome to increase the possibility that we can cause an autoimmune reaction, because we can treat autoimmune reactions. Other people, as you know, have worked, Carol Shields, my colleague here at Wills, are working on bispecific proteins that bind uveal melanoma on one side, and the other side bind T cells and bring them together, and they help a little bit. As you can see, they have made a change, and that's why the FDA approved the use of this agent in the United States, and it has made a difference. We think that doing these things in conjunction, like a lot of other things in cancer, is going to make a difference in the long run. And we're going to be able to shift this curve, this poor point over here this way. Another thing that we've been working on, and we were able to obtain an UK Innovate grant, is for the use of saRNAs. And this is in conjunction with Dr. Kevin Hamill at University of Liverpool and Professor Colin Willoughby at University of Ulster. And as you know, we are in a DNA world, but way before there was a DNA world, there was an RNA world. And the RNA world was there for much longer than we've been in a DNA world, quite frankly. When we think of RNA, from medical school, we were taught there's a messenger RNA, and that's become very important with Moderna and so forth, and ribosomal RNA that takes the mRNA and turns it as like a little factory into the amino acids attach and make proteins, and the transfer RNA that bring the amino acids to make that protein. Well, that's what we learned in medical school, but there's a host of other RNAs, and I think now more and more of us are aware of these. And there were actually Nobel Prizes that have been won for these other RNAs, for instance, siRNAs, which are interference RNAs that decrease the production of proteins by causing a degradation of the mRNA. And there's been a proliferation since the Nobel Prize that was won in 2006 for the siRNA work. As you can see, there's been a tremendous proliferation of studies in siRNAs, the interference RNAs. And here I did a study showing that between 1991 and 2023, there were 112,000 publications. So siRNAs decrease the amount of mRNA by using this dicer system, and it shows some homology to certain mRNAs, and that activates them, and then it breaks them down, if you will. And already it's in FDA, they're FDA approved, some of them. Patisiran is FDA approved for treatment of TTR amyloidosis, and it's already out there in clinical use. Acute hepatic porphyria is already out there in clinical use as well. So these siRNAs that decrease the amount of mRNAs are being FDA approved, if not already FDA approved. Well, there was this other group of small RNAs, and these oligonucleotide small RNAs seem to increase the amount of protein production instead of decreasing it. And it was initially thought to just be a fluke and, a lab error. And as you can see, as opposed to the 112,000 results, when you do a PubMed search on saRNAs, there's 375 results. So I was more interested in the 375 because I don't like to do what everybody else does, as you heard me say before. So I said, I want to study saRNAs. And so how saRNAs work is kind of similar, but instead of decreasing the way siRNAs work, the amount of dicer, they actually go into the DNA and increase the amount of mRNA that's being produced. And as I said, we are working on using this for PAC6, and we've received a grant from UK. We found some candidates and are actually going into small animal trials right now on this. So this is kind of neat, and I'll keep you informed, and we're then going to look at others as well. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is vibrational OCT. This is the team that first started looking at it for human use. I'll tell you why this is important. So vibrational OCT combines sound and optical coherence tomography and allows us to determine stiffness. And why stiffness? In medicine, as you know, doctors traditionally use all their senses. Seeing, and in ophthalmology, we use that for imaging. Hearing, we auscultate, though rarely in ophthalmology. Smelling, unfortunately, we have to do that in certain patients. Tasting, they used to do that when they used to have to determine diabetes from the urine. And touch. And touch was very important for medical school. You know, they would tell you, well, can you feel the spleen over here? And I could never feel the spleen. I said, of course I can feel the spleen. And then the liver, the liver you would feel that if it was enlarged with hepatomegaly and if it was stiffer than normal. Well, I couldn't determine that either. But what was really cool is that with MRI, you could send sound waves or ultrasound waves into the liver, and then look at changes in the proton resonance using the MRI and determine the stiffness of the liver. Now, that was really important because in the United States, with our wonderful diet of French fries and the increasing use of alcohol throughout the world, patients are getting cirrhosis of the liver from the alcohol and non-alcoholic steatic hepatosis. And so the FDA approved the use of magnetic resonance elastography for a quantitative determination of the stiffness of the liver. And as I said, in ophthalmology, we've kind of atrophied all of our other senses for maximizing understanding of visual perception. And I use the allegory of Plato's Republic of the cave, where in Plato's cave allegory, we're all supposed to be prisoners locked in a dark cave, and we're shackled so that we can only see straight in front of us in this dark cave. And behind us is a flame, and in front of the flame are these masked people that we can't see, but they carry these statues, and what we see in front of us are the shadows of the statues, and that's what our conception of the world is, our perception of the world. And we as academicians sit there and see these shadows and make up amazing acronyms for these shadows. There goes Shrem followed by PVEC. These are shadows that we look at. And then the other thing that's important is the extracellular matrix is important because it protects the cells, and the cells also modify the extracellular matrix. We always look at it from the point of view of the cell, but the extracellular matrix is just as important as well, because as the extracellular matrix changes, that changes what happens to the cell also. If you'll remember from your physics, elastic elements are Newtonian and follow, like a Newtonian spring, a very constant oscillatory wave of stretching and coming back. And there's ways to measure that. I don't know why the computer's moving forward by itself. I apologize. There's ways to determine the stiffness of tissues mechanically once they're removed from the tissue that you want to measure. Viscous elements, on the other hand, it takes energy to start, and they don't follow the same very nice stress strain curves at all, because it takes more energy to start the whole process from occurring. And then the most complex of all is tissues that have viscoelasticity. In other words, they have both a viscous component and an elastic component. And basically, all cells have both all tissues have a viscous and an elastic component. All biological tissues do. And there it takes, again, energy to, say, move the water out of it, and then the Newtonian part comes in. So a viscoelastic material is a combination of both a sinusoidal potential that's in phase with the stress strain and another that's not. And think about it as a Gedanken experiment. If you take, say, a sponge and you have it really a wet sponge, and you put it in a beaker, and then you start to press that wet sponge, the first thing that you do is you squeeze out the water. And that's an easy thing to do. And once all the water is squeezed out, then what's left is the Newtonian component of that sponge, and that follows the Newtonian physics part. If, on the other hand, you then wait and let the sponge resorb that water, it takes a while. First, it'll expand slowly via the Newtonian spring concept, and then it'll expand more slowly as the water from the surrounding beaker tries to come in and resume its position in the sponge. And that's a good way to look at viscoelastic substances. And it can be modeled using a spring and a dashpot. Now, I had no clue what a dashpot was at all, but the spring is the Newtonian component, and the dashpot is the part that kind of dissipates energy, that takes longer for things to work, the water component of it. And a dashpot is actually on many door frames to absorb the energy and slows down the closure of the door. So the next time you look at a door, you'll be looking at it with a different frame of view. And a cornea, when it bends, has both that spring component that occurs after the dashpot component occurs, and you can kind of actually model them in parallel or in series. And then the other thing is the hysteresis curve. Now, when you think of hysteresis, you think of the, things like the aura analyzer. Well, it's actually a curve. It's not 2 points. And to consider hysteresis 2 points is not right. Think about that sponge that I was telling you about. You don't look at the sponge at the start when it's full of water, and the sponge when it's starting to get the fluid back, and say that's a hysteresis curve. The hysteresis curve is the whole bit of the sponge at the start and the sponge at the end. Now, the other thing that is important to know is resonance frequencies. And resonance is what happens when you push an object at a certain frequency. For instance, if you take a child and put them on a swing and you hit the right resonant frequency of that swing, it'll swing. You won't have to push very often because it's at the resonance frequency of the swing. You might have seen a YouTube video of a bridge in the state of Washington that reached the resonant frequency and swung higher and higher, and finally it broke. Well, we can use that resonant frequency to determine the stiffness of tissues. But before that, I told you how in the FDA had approved magnetic resonance elastography for the liver fibrosis. And I went to those people, this was from Mayo, had developed that. And I said, well, why don't we use this for the eye? So we did magnetic resonance elastography of the eye, and ex vivo, it works. We can determine the stiffness of the tissue of the eye as a whole, but it's not at a point where it's good enough to do it in the human situation, number one. Number two, not everybody has access to MRIs. So what we were working on then is doing it in a different way, and that's using OCT and giving it sound, giving the tissue sound, and the sound then gets to the resonant frequency. As you change the frequency, you get to the resonant frequency, and there you can see the tissue vibrate the most with this very sensitive OCT that we all are using right now, very sensitive OCTs. And then you can determine the resonant frequency or frequencies of the tissue. And for instance, on the right, you can see that skin has certain frequencies, a very low frequency resonance for the cells of the skin, and then higher frequencies for the collagen components of the skin. And you can go from the resonant frequency to actually the stiffness of the cells and the stiffness of the collagen matrix as well. And recently we had this paper published of using vibrational OCT in normal corneas. And this is kind of what it looks like. These are the results that one gets. Again, this is how it looks. This is a representation, and you can see the resonance here in a cornea once you get to the resonant frequency of a component of the cornea. And first of all, we were able to show that when you used our machine and a Pentacam, there was the thickness by OCT from our machine and the Pentacam were very comparable. We then found that corneas had certain peaks, just like the skin does. This peak we suspected, again, the softest peak, because the higher the frequency, the stiffer the tissue. So if you want to know the exact formula, it's the elastic modulus, i.e. the stiffness is proportional to the resonant frequency squared divided by the thickness. So the lower the frequency, the softer, if you will, the component of the cornea. So we suspected this was epithelial, cells, and these were collagen peaks. And we did it in different parts of it. As you can see, our numbers are around 1 to 2 megapascals or so. And we have another paper that was just accepted in TVST, where we actually sliced the different layers of the cornea in human donor corneas, and then repeated the vibrational OCT and determined the vibrational OCT peaks following removal of different slices. And as you can see, once the anterior-most slice of the cornea was removed, peak 1 diminished tremendously in the 2 human donor corneas that we did this on. And we were able to show that the first slice had the most numbers of cells, and therefore our concept of the lowest peak being the cellular component is true. Now, there's other ways that people are looking at the stiffness of tissues, but you have to look at the numbers that they get. This number doesn't mean very much, but the numbers go around 1 megapascal. Some go to gigapascals, and that's when you're looking at very, very small microscopic areas. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Magnetic resonance elastography, too low. Again, there's other ways that people are doing it. Kilopascals. Remember, we were talking that we were at around 1 to 2 megapascals. Now, here's the cool thing. It took till October 2012 to find out the elastic and viscous properties of silly putty. And silly putty is the classic viscoelastic substance. And guess what? They found that silly putty is around 1.7 megapascals. And I ran out after I read this paper, and I bought like 5 silly putties. And my wife was saying, well, why do you have all these silly putties? And I kept feeling it. And it's about right. It's if you thin it down to about 500.5 millimeters silly putty, and you put your finger in it, it feels like the cornea. So we're silly putty is around 1.7 megapascals, and we're saying that the cornea is between 1 and say 7 megapascals. So this is real, and this is the kind of the numbers that you should expect when you read these articles. So I think we're also looking at the stiffness of other parts of the eye as well. And this is in porcine eyes. And we're down looking at the Bruch's membrane and lamina cribrosa. And I'm going to leave you with this because this is the cool thing. When we think of the retina and we think of the choroid, we think of Bruch's membrane as this tissue that separates the two and has an immunologic component. And I want to circle back to the immunology because if you get breaks in Bruch's membrane, then that allows then for antigens to be expressed in the choroidal circulation that shouldn't have been otherwise, and probably is the reason why patients with multifocal choroiditis get an epi-Mudes reaction. So the Bruch's membrane has an immunologic component that separates the retina from the rest of the body, and also has a physiologic component that prevents choroidal vascularity to enter into the retina. What's really cool is that we're being able to show that the retina and the choroid are shock absorbers for Bruch's membrane. And this tissue that before we thought was inert and just sitting there is actually being protected by the cellular tissue that we think is so important. So it's kind of a reverse kind of thinking. So with that, I leave you. This is just really cool stuff that's happening out there. And thank you for the opportunity to let me share these ideas with you.
Jose, thank you so much. You can keep your video on, Jose. You've introduced, I've never paid more attention to a talk because you've introduced some really, really new concepts, and I really had to give it my 100% attention. First of all, let me introduce Xingyi. You're familiar with Xingyi. She's the co-director of this new center, and also the research director of the NUH and NUS Department of Ophthalmology. So Xingyi, perhaps I'll hand over to you with some to kick off the Q&A.
Thanks, Wei-Wen. Thanks, Prof. Jose, again for your wonderful talk. Maybe I'll just help one of our participants who posted a question in our group chat to ask the first question. So Daniel is asking that your research spans into many areas beyond the eye, and you seem to be a master of all trades. So he's wondering, how does exploring other disease organs like in cancer, you mentioned liver and prostate cancers, how has that helped you to develop your research in ophthalmology? And how did you, go this route of going into cancer and then coming to ophthalmology? Perhaps if you could share a little bit more.
Well, I think it was because my mother was a family practitioner, and my dad was a general surgeon, and they would come to me and ask me, well, I've got this sty here, what should I do? And, oh, Mom, no, I'm a retina guy. I only deal with the back of the eye. And she said, look, I deal with the whole body, and you can't even deal with a 2.5 centimeter part of the body. So I try to stay attuned as best as I can to the rest and read New England Journal of Medicine on a weekly basis. It's kind of neat because my son, who's now a urologist, he reads New England Journal of Medicine now on a weekly basis for that as well. And I think if we forget the fact that we are first and foremost medical doctors and secondly ophthalmologists, we fall into Plato's prison of the cave and only look at shadows.
Really fascinating. Thanks for the inspirational talk, Jose. I think really looking at different aspects of research can really help us to think more broadly about eye research. I would like to go back to the first part of your talk when you're talking about, using vaccines for treatment of cancer. So as you know, CAR T-cell immunotherapy is really widely used in cancer. Do you think this is something that we could potentially apply to ocular cancers like melanoma or even retinoblastoma?
Yeah, so there is work ongoing in that area. And the question is whether it can be used systemically or locally. So the problem of local therapy is the breakdown of the blood retinal barrier. So I wouldn't be so excited about the use of it in the vitreous and in the eye, but using it in the choroid makes sense because that's already, non-immunologically protected area. So I think it's reasonable to consider its use there. It's interesting because about 15% of vitreoretinal lymphomas have an inflammatory component to them, and those tend to maybe do a little bit better. So maybe there's some role, but the inflammatory part is a little, disturbing. So you have to be able to attenuate that. You have to be able to turn it on and off at will.
Jose, if I may, along the same vein, still on the same topic of viro-oncolytic therapy. So how is the choice of virus decided? And is it based on whether they can penetrate certain tumors better, and then whether they exhibit some tropism, because especially for if we're going to talk about applying it to ophthalmology, then that becomes a relevant question. And if we were to apply it to ophthalmology, then route of administration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, let's take uveal melanoma. We're pretty good at treating local uveal melanoma, right? And yes, we do lose vision with local plaque brachytherapy, for instance, or proton beam, because of the radiation retinopathy effect. But local treatment is 90+% good at treating local disease. So I'm more concerned about the metastatic disease than local use of these agents. We don't have, well, aside from Kimtrac that was just FDA approved recently, there's nothing else out there that works. So that's where our focus has been on the use in metastatic disease, and that's where our phase 1 clinical trial was accepted as an abstract for the most recent cancer research symposium coming up in June. But there, the tropism is not only dependent upon the virus, but you have to be agnostic to the virus, because if you have an immune reaction to the virus, it's not going to work. The virus is going to be neutralized. You have to pick viruses that are somewhat exotic, whether they're naturally exotic or whether you've artificially constructed them to be exotic so that they bypass your immune system, but not bypass it enough that it then goes wild in your body, i.e. the COVID situation. So it's a fine line that one goes. We've been using VSV, and the reason that we use VSV is that it's seen it's outside the United States. First of all, it's not seen. It's an animal virus, but in humans it causes a very localized disease that's not widespread and very mild disease in humans. So even in immune compromised people, i.e. patients with cancer, they can normally take care of that, but the cancer doesn't know how to deal with the VSV because of the lack of the interferon.
Thanks, Jose. And do you then think that this would be a one-off treatment, because then we will develop at some point neutralizing antibodies potentially against these viruses? And then question number 2 would then be, would this be a solo treatment on its own, or is it going to be complementary or adjunctive to other therapies for the particular type of cancer?
Yeah, so like I said, even when you think of autoimmune diseases, it's rare to treat autoimmune diseases with just one agent. And cancers, probably you have to go via different routes, combining CAR T cells with checkpoint inhibitors, combining checkpoint inhibitors with other biologics like BRAF inhibitors. So our concept is this destroys them, releases the antigens, but if you then give them CAR T cells that are specific for certain antigens, it bumps up the possibility that you're going to be able to treat these diseases. And the problem is that the cancers are mutating as well, because it's, you're naturally selecting then for the ones that have less mutations. And therefore we're thinking, let's increase their mutations. So it's a battle. And I don't think it's a battle that is won. It's a battle where we neutralize things and keep it in check.
Thanks, Jose. I'd like to move on to the second part of your talk when you were introducing the idea of the small activating RNAs. That was really fascinating because I think most of us are familiar with siRNA or microRNAs, but saRNA is really something that is different. Perhaps I could invite you to comment a little bit about how you could use saRNA for PAX6 disease, which you kind of mentioned, but didn't go into too much of detail. So is it because of haploinsufficiency and you're using the saRNA to activate the expression? If you could just elaborate a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah. So these patients, as you know, can have the colobomatous component. Well, you're not going to help the colobomatous component, but they're really affected as well by the limbal stem cell deficiency in the cornea. That we can maybe do something about. And think about it this way as well. We're looking at the worst case scenario. It's an orphan disease. The FDA has less problems with dealing with orphan disease because we don't have a lot of treatments for orphan disease. And so we're looking at that. But think of all the other limbal stem cell deficiencies that we can then try this agent on if it works in this worst case scenario of haploinsufficiency. That's all I have to say.
Jose, if I may, just one more question regarding saRNA before we jump into the VOCT, is because RNA interference is fascinating, highly specific, highly selective, but is it compared to CRISPR-Cas or like talons, do we have to worry about off-target effects?
So for siRNAs, there are off-target effects. But again, it's gotten pretty good. The bioinformatics has gotten pretty good such that the off-target effects aren't that big. And to the point where the FDA has approved the treatment. So it's pretty advanced. saRNAs, I grant you, aren't as advanced, and there probably are off-target effects. For me to say that there aren't would be disingenuous. But again, the bioinformatics has gotten so good that the amount of off-target effects are small. And if you pick carefully what tissues you treat, i.e. a subconjunctival injection of the agent or a topical drop, you're really going to limit it because you're not going to be treating other parts of the body. And so the questions then are, what will be the adverse off-target effects in a local area? And you're really kind of decreasing the amount as you say, okay, I'm not going to treat systemically, I'm going to only treat locally, and I'm only going to treat certain tissues of even that local area. You're really decreasing the chances and likelihood of off-target effects.
Great, thanks, Jose. If I may, just one final question on vibrational OCT. So Victor was wondering about its application in myopia, a disease that plagues us in Singapore with a high myopia rate, whether, determining scleral stiffness is going to be a potential endpoint or surrogate endpoint for myopia management.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I thought Victor was going to ask about the lamina cribrosa because right now our work on dissections are looking at the lamina cribrosa, and Joel Schumann, who has worked a lot on OCT, has gotten really interested in our vibrational OCT studies. And we've been working on looking at the lamina cribrosa and Brooks membrane. I think the next step after that will be the sclera. The problem is getting acceptance by other groups. You know, we're biologists, you know, ophthalmologists tend to look at things from a biological point of view, not bioengineering point of view. And so it's difficult to get these concepts of stiffness of tissues, of viscoelasticity of tissues through our heads. But it's becoming more commonplace. And as we get more papers out, as the cornea people start talking, hey, you know, we can determine stiffness of the cornea, and we're starting to look at keratoconus, et cetera. Then other groups are saying, well, maybe, yeah, let's go back and think about glaucoma again, and let's go back and look at Bruch's membrane. Now we're getting interest in the retina and glaucoma group. And then just slowly, the last wave are the pediatric ophthalmology people and the myopia. So they're waves, and the waves are, you know, we react with the wave that's occurring.
Jose, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your insight. I've really enjoyed your talk, and I wish that we can stay on, because I've scribbled down like lots of questions that I still want to ask you, but unfortunately that's got to wait. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed the session as much as I have. If you've missed any part of this talk or any of the previous talks that we've had over the last couple of weeks, you may scan this QR code, which will provide you access to the recorded talks. The talk this evening will be available in 2 to 3 days' time. So please we thank you for your patience. And we'll also like to share with you that we will be launching our official launch for our Center for Innovation and Precision Eye Health will be on the 25th of March. This is on a Saturday, 8:30 in the morning. Unfortunately, we don't have a Zoom option. Otherwise, Jose, we would love to have you join us. But for those of you who are interested to join us, there is a QR code in the bottom right corner that you can scan. And now, it gives me great pleasure to share with you this video that really summarizes what this center that you've been hearing about is all about. Please enjoy.
Our eyes are an important part of our overall well-being and quality of life. In Singapore today, around 180,000 people aged above 60 suffer from visual impairment. And as our population ages, this figure is forecast to double by 2030. With good preventive care and early detection, most eye diseases can be treated or even prevented. NUHS aims to deliver world-class eye care and preventive eye health that is accessible, patient-centric, anchored in a community, and driven by cutting-edge research.
Translational research is the driving force powering our efforts here at the NUS Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine, where we seek to inspire everyone to better health. I believe the research, innovation, and education initiatives from this new center will lead to concrete, meaningful health benefits to our population.
At the Center for Innovation and Precision Eye Health, our mission is to drive and enable precision ophthalmologists for population and tertiary eye care. We aim to be the center of excellence for research, education, and clinical services. We have 4 major pillars: population data science, community eye care, precision medicine, and optometry education.
The NUHS Integrated Clinical Data Platform incorporates data across disciplines. By leveraging on this platform, we can unravel new eye disease trends in our population. For example, geospatial analytics allows us to identify areas with heavy disease burden and prioritize our resources.
Our goal is to implement and improve ocular health screening in the community. We want to detect and treat in a timely manner patients who are not aware that they're losing sight. By reinventing our ocular investigation strategies, we can extend eye care to the community. Our team of ophthalmologists, vision scientists, and engineers are developing easy-to-use, multimodal, and portable devices These devices, born from contemporary advances in vision and brain research, empowered by artificial intelligence, will allow for accessible and accurate assessment of ocular health in a fast-paced community eye care setting.
Optometrists are first-line community eye care providers in detecting age-related eye diseases and managing myopia. With our aging population and myopia endemic, co-management eye care between optometrists and ophthalmologists will have increasing importance. It is essential for optometrists to maintain high level of competency and to be updated with the latest knowledge, skills, and technology. Our center's focus is to provide continuous learning opportunities for practicing optometrists through new pedagogical methods and robust clinical training.
Patients with inherited retinal disease, IRD for short, have very limited treatment options. Various IRD-specific therapeutic trials are underway. Majority, if not all, are conducted in the USA and/or Europe. These treatments are costly and not accessible to most patients. We need better understanding of IRD within our region to make precision medicine available for our patients.
In this center, we strive to introduce the first retinal stem cell replacement therapy for patients with advanced retinal degeneration. Through our research with A*STAR, we are developing retinal stem cells that are able to evade the host immune system with improved survival and clinical outcome. We are also developing personalized RNA therapy for our patients, targeting Asian-specific mutations. It is our dream to prevent vision loss in patients.
In the face of increasing health burden in our aging population, the synergy between research, innovation, and education needs to be further harnessed to deliver impactful, transformative eye care for our population. The Center of Innovation and Precision Eye Health provides an ideal cross-disciplinary environment that exemplifies this. The center's mission to promote eye health and safe sight through innovation, delivering better healthcare for our population through world-class research and education.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we ran over by 2 minutes. We hope you've enjoyed the session and the video, which actually is a sneak preview. It's the first time sharing it with the public, and we look forward to welcoming you to our future webinar sessions. So we'll now close the session. Thank you, Jose. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.